This is the Nikon Z6 III, the brand new full-frame mirrorless camera from Nikon. Let's take a quick look at what it has to offer. This is the Nikon Z6 III, an update of the Z6 II, and it's quite a major upgrade. The main headline feature is a new sensor. It's still a 24.5 megapixel sensor, but now it's the world's first partially stacked CMOS sensor. Now there's two basic kinds of sensor used in cameras now. There's the back illuminated sensor used in more affordable cameras, and the stacked CMOS sensor, which is more expensive to produce and is therefore used in the more expensive higher end cameras. What Nikon has done here is created the first partially stacked CMOS sensor, which has some stacking apparently at the top and the bottom, so we're told, but that gives you some extra speed, not as much as a fully stacked one, but it's significant cost saving, which according to Nikon means that the camera is able to deliver very, very fast performance without the premium pricing of a fully stacked CMOS sensor. So this camera can shoot at 120 frames per second in stills or 240 frames per second in video. Externally, the Z6 III has also had a restyle compared with the original Z6 and Z7. You'll notice the top prism now has that raked back styling of the Z8 and Z9 as opposed to the kind of weirdly designed one on the top of the Z6 and Z7, which to me always looked like some kind of appendage. It never looked like it was, fully part of the camera. This is much more attractive, but more importantly is some of the changes on the back of the camera. It now has a fully articulated LCD screen instead of just a tilting one of the Z6 and Z7. They've moved the play button from the top left to the bottom right, and they've also put the illumination switch for the LCD on the top on its own button instead of a ring around the collar. Other than that, externally it's pretty much the same. All the other buttons are in the same place and it feels kind of the same, except that it's notably heavier. It's about 45 grams heavier than the Z6 II, and you really do feel that 45 grams actually when you pick up the camera. It feels a bit chunkier. So let's talk about that speed in a bit more detail. The Z6 III can shoot at 120 frames per second with full AF, but that is in DX mode with 10 megapixels. If you switch to full frame at the full resolution of 24 megapixels, you're still getting 60 frames per second with full AF. And there's also a pre-capture, which means that it starts recording for 1 second before you press the shutter button. So if you're shooting at say 60 frames a second, you're going to get 60 shots recorded before you've pressed the shutter button, which is great for high speed, sport, wildlife, that sort of thing. The Z6 III also has a new EVF with a class-leading 5760K resolution, 60 frames per second refresh rate, and a very bright 4000 nits viewfinder, which Nikon says is the brightest on the market. Also, another first for Nikon, it has the DCI P3 color gamut, which is the first time this has been used in a mirrorless camera. Not surprisingly, the Z6 III features the latest XP7 processor, which delivers, according to Nikon, incredible image quality, dynamic range and color fidelity. It also enables the camera to produce phenomenally fast scan speeds and ultra-fast data readout, as well as very fast AF calculations on a level with the Z8 and Z9. The Z6 III also features the same AF system as used in the Z8 and Z9, which is super fast and of course includes subject recognition of people, animals, vehicles, aeroplanes, etc. The Z6 III features the VR system which was first introduced from the recently launched ZF, which introduced for the first time focus point VR. Now in focus point VR, the movement of the sensor for the image stabilization is linked to the focus point that's been selected, which means that it can provide up to 8 stops of image stabilization. The Z6 III features full weather sealing like the Z8 and Z9, and it can operate in temperatures as low as -10 degrees. There's also an optional vertical battery grip, the MBN14, which takes 2 additional batteries and can also be used to charge those batteries when plugged into a separate USB-C port. Like the Z8, the Z6 III features 2 card slots, CF Express Type B and SD, and it uses the familiar Nikon EN-EL15 battery. One thing that's been significantly ramped up on the Z6 III compared to Z6 II is the video functionality. Nikon described this as a hybrid camera, and they have put a lot of extra effort into making this camera appeal to the videographers and vloggers out there. Firstly, As I mentioned earlier, Nikon has introduced here a fully articulated tilt and swivel LCD screen instead of the one that just tilts up behind the camera. This makes it obviously attractive to vloggers in particular who can see themselves when they're shooting. The actual spec of the video is also considerably higher now. The Z6 III offers 4K and 6K in-camera RAW recording with a range of codecs including NRAW, ProRes RAW HQ, ProRes 422 HQ, H.265 and H.264. It shoots 12-bit RAW and 10-bit log recording, and it can shoot at 240 frames per second for 10 times slow-mo. The camera features a mic port, but this also doubles as a line-in selectable in the menu, and of course there's a headphone socket as well. And under the other flap you've got the USB-C, HDMI and the remote port. So overall, in many respects, the Z6 III is like a slightly cut down Z8, which is in itself a slightly cut down version of the Z9. So you're getting a camera which has quite a lot of the features of a camera which was over £5,000 when it was launched a couple of years ago for around about half of that amount of money. Now the Z6 III can be bought body only obviously, but it comes also with a choice of two kits, including the 24-70 f4S, which I've got on the camera right now, or the 24-120 f4. So that's the Z6 III specs. How does it perform? Well, the technical editor Andy Westlake and I were fortunate enough to go along to an event that Nikon put on for our benefit to be able to try out the camera in action, and we photographed basketball in London with it. And we have to say that we were both very impressed with the speed and the ability to lock on to subjects of two very fast moving basketball players. Overall, Nikon have delivered what looks like a very impressive camera, very, very good specification, and the time we had with it, shooting with it, was very high performance also. It is a fair bit more expensive, probably about 25% more expensive than the Z6 II was at launch, but what you're getting is a camera which is very close in spec to the Z8 for less money, except of course you're getting a 24 megapixel sensor instead of a 45 megapixel sensor. So overall, the Z6 III looks like a highly impressive camera, not only on paper, but in performance terms in the sort of the short period that we had with it. It's significantly more expensive than the Z6 II was at launch, but you could in some ways describe it as a 24 megapixel version of the Z8. So you could argue that it's actually pretty good value for money. We'll have a full review of the camera in due course as soon as we manage to get hold of one for a decent enough time to give it a proper test. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video. Do comment it below, tell us what you think of it, first impressions, like the video if you enjoyed it, and of course don't forget to subscribe to the channel.